You recognize the feeling before you even admit it. You tell yourself you're healing, but what you're really doing is collecting permission to stay soft, to stay stuck, and to avoid the one kind of pain that actually changes a life. Accountability. And you don't just consume comfort. You perform it. You live stream your tears like they're proof of depth, and you call the attention support while it quietly trains you to demand more and more relief, forever. This video is about the hidden self inside a whole generation, addicted to healing, addicted to blame, addicted to comfort. Not because they're weak, because the system they live in rewards weakness faster than it rewards courage. Welcome to the hidden self. Let's start with a simple image. In ancient Sparta or Rome, a warrior returns from war with scars that look like failure to outsiders, but the society around him treats those scars like evidence, evidence that he survived, evidence that he paid, evidence that he can withstand pain without collapsing into excuses. His tears are not monetized. His suffering is not packaged. His pain doesn't become a brand. He eats, he works, he lives, and the community holds him to the same standard as everyone else. Now cut to your phone screen. You open a feed, and it's all motion and noise, and suddenly the most common content isn't progress, it's breakdown. A person gets disrespected in a comment, and they cry on camera like it's a funeral. Someone gets criticized at work and turns that criticism into an identity. Entire essays appear about trauma so small it's almost laughable, except the comments section treats it like scripture. And then you see the new kind of flex, the flex of being harmed, the flex of being misunderstood, the flex of being a victim of toxic people. We live in a culture where pain is currency, where feelings are a performance, where attention is the real product, and healing is the marketing slogan. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of people aren't seeking relief from suffering, they're seeking protection from growth. They want the emotional benefits of transformation without paying the cost of transformation. And once you notice that pattern, you can't unsee it. I'm going to say it bluntly. Many people today don't want to be well, they want to be excused. The first trap is the healing addiction. People act like healing is a path, but for a growing number of them, it's a loop. They keep returning to the same wound, touching it, polishing it, reposting it, and calling it self-awareness. They work on themselves so obsessively that they never actually change anything that matters. Let me tell you how it looks in real life, not in slogans. A young adult has a bad month. Maybe they lose a job, or they fail an interview, or a relationship ends. The old world would have asked, what did you do? What did you learn? What will you do differently next time? But the new world asks, who caused this to you? So they begin a ritual. They post, they vent, they label, they diagnose themselves in public. They collect phrases like trophies, trauma, abandonment issues, attachment wounds, neurodivergence, gaslighting, toxic dynamics. They might even get the right label once in a while, but the addiction is not accuracy. The addiction is identity. The label becomes a protective blanket. If you are traumatized, then you don't have to risk. If you are anxious, then you don't have to commit. If you are sensitive, then you don't have to build boundaries. You can explain your behavior forever and never have to discipline it. You can feel it when someone is addicted to healing because their story never ends. Their past is always active, like a live source draining their future. They say things like, I'm still processing, but the processing has become a substitute for decisions. They keep revisiting the same memories, but they never enter the harder territory. Discomfort with uncertainty, discomfort with trying, discomfort with being imperfect. They want emotional safety without behavioral risk. And here's the psychological mechanism you need to understand. Healing addiction is often a disguised fear of responsibility. Responsibility means you might be partly at fault. Responsibility means you might have to change. Responsibility means you might lose excuses. So instead, the person converts life pain into a moral narrative where they are innocent and the world is dangerous. When your mind learns that being wounded earns sympathy, you start seeking situations that keep you wounded. Not because you love pain, but because pain has a role. It earns comfort. It earns distance from accountability. It earns the right to be treated gently while you do nothing.
That's why social media is so perfect for this addiction. It gives immediate reinforcement. A post about feeling worthless gets hundreds of supportive comments. For a moment, dopamine floods. You feel seen, you feel less alone, you feel less responsible because the crowd is validating your interpretation. But validation is not transformation. Validation can become an anesthetic. You stop practicing hard skills because the feedback loop is emotional, not behavioral.
Soon you don't ask, what should I do next? You ask, how should I frame this so people will respond in the way I need? That's a brutal sentence, but it's true. Some people don't heal, they optimize their emotional audience, and when that becomes normal, the second addiction grows. The second addiction is blame. Blame is a shortcut to emotional relief. If you blame, you don't have to look inward. If you blame, you don't have to rebuild your habits. If you blame, you can keep your self-image intact. Blame is the fastest way to restore your pride. Because if you can explain your failure as something external, you don't have to feel the shame of trying and not succeeding. You don't have to feel the humiliation of being ordinary. You can stay a good person in your own story while the world is the villain. Online, blame becomes a team sport. Someone fails at work and claims the environment is toxic. Someone can't hold a relationship and claims the other person is manipulative. Someone is broke and claims the system is rigged. Sometimes there is truth in these claims. Sometimes workplaces are abusive. Sometimes people are manipulative. Sometimes economies are unfair. But the pattern that matters is not whether harm exists. The pattern is the reflex. The first move is always external. Instead of asking, where did I miss the skills? Where did I avoid the discomfort? What boundary did I fail to hold? What commitment did I refuse to maintain? They ask, who did this to me? This reflex is not accidental. It's a protective strategy. Inside the hidden self, there is often a frightened child who learned that admitting wrongdoing leads to punishment, rejection, or humiliation. So the adult adapts. The adult becomes a prosecutor. Prosecutor mode feels powerful. It feels like clarity, it feels like justice, but it quietly destroys your future because the prosecutor never learns, the prosecutor never repairs. Imagine a person who gets low performance reviews. The older generation might treat it like a painful but useful mirror. They would ask, what are the numbers? What are my gaps? What can I improve next quarter? But the blame culture encourages a different script. The person posts about being micromanaged. They claim burnout from oppression. They find a supportive community online that confirms the villain. They might even become popular for it. They might get pity. They might get sympathy. They might even get a new job for the right narrative, not the right skills. Now tell me what they didn't do. They didn't study the feedback. They didn't build the competencies. They didn't get better. They replaced growth with an explanation that made them feel morally clean. And that's how blame becomes a habit, not just a belief, a behavior pattern, a way of avoiding the hardest question: what would I do differently if nobody rescued me? The third addiction is comfort. Comfort is the reward system that keeps everything else running. People say they want to heal, but comfort is what they truly crave. Comfort is immediate. Comfort is available on demand. Comfort is easier than discipline. Comfort shows up as scrolling. Comfort shows up as constant entertainment. Comfort shows up as endless consumption of advice without execution. Comfort shows up as refusing silence. Comfort shows up as replacing action with discussion. You know this because you felt it. You've watched a video at 2 in the morning about how to fix your mindset, then you fall asleep without doing anything that would change your next day. You felt mentally busy. You felt informed. You didn't feel tired from real effort, and you call that self-care. But self-care isn't the avoidance of effort. Self-care is replenishing your energy while still doing the work that builds a life. In many households and workplaces, the real enemy is not trauma. It's inertia dressed up as gentleness. Comfort addiction is often protected by a moral story. People say, I deserve rest. Yes, you do. But there's a difference between rest and escape. Rest restores, escape numbs. Rest has an end date. Escape becomes a lifestyle.
When you're addicted to comfort, you start treating every demand as violence. If someone sets boundaries, it's abuse. If someone asks for consistency, it's control. If someone expects you to contribute, it's oppression. You become allergic to structure. That's why you see so many people stuck in a teenage emotional stance long after they should have matured. They want relationships without responsibility. They want love without accountability. They want freedom without consequences. They want to be held, and they don't want to hold anyone else. Now, here is the part nobody likes to hear. Comfort addiction doesn't just make you weak, it makes you dangerous to yourself and others. Because a person who is addicted to comfort will eventually demand comfort from everyone around them. And that turns into manipulation. Even when the person believes they are innocent, they begin to use their pain as leverage, not necessarily with explicit threats. More subtly, they imply harm when challenged. They dramatize discomfort when asked for clarity. They withdraw affection to punish. They turn, "I need you to listen," into, "You must agree with me." And because the culture has been trained to fear conflict, people often comply.
They step lightly around the emotional landmines. They become managers of another person's nervous system. They become unpaid therapists. Then the victim becomes the director. The relationship becomes a platform where one person performs hurt and the other person performs obedience. That's not healing. That's emotional control with a soft mask. So why is all this happening now? Why does victim culture spread so quickly? And why do so many smart people participate without noticing they're harming themselves? The answer is sociological, but it's also psychological. In the past, cultures often valued honor. Honor has a hard edge. It asks you to become reliable. It asks you to carry your weight. It doesn't reward crying as much as it rewards competence. Pain was acknowledged, but pain didn't automatically grant you moral immunity. Now the wheel has moved toward a different system, the culture of the victim. In this system, pain is not just acknowledged, it is monetized. It becomes content. It becomes branding. It becomes a tool to gain status. And once pain becomes status, you get an economy of suffering. This is the emotional stock market. Who can talk the saddest? Who can sound the most wronged? Who can produce the most dramatic narrative? The person who performs better earns more attention. The person who earns more attention gets more protection. The person with more protection can avoid deeper scrutiny. And the crowd, addicted to stimulation, treats the loudest pain as the most deserving truth. This is why arguments online get so toxic. Someone makes a point. Another person labels them as insensitive, harmful, or invalidating. Once the victim label is on the table, discussion becomes impossible. The goal is no longer to understand. The goal is to punish. Even the smallest disagreement becomes evidence of oppression. Even a direct question becomes harassment. And because social media is designed to reward engagement, the loudest emotional conflict spreads faster than honest competence. Here's what happens to the individual in that environment. Their inner compass gets replaced by outer approval. They stop measuring themselves by effort, honesty, and results. They start measuring themselves by reactions, likes, shares, sympathy, and agreement. So the person becomes trapped in a loop. They need an audience to regulate their emotions. That audience gives them dopamine, but it does to build their character. Eventually, the person is no longer living for their life. They are living for the performance of their life. And once that happens, blame enters as the necessary fuel. Because if you need the audience, you need villains to justify your feelings. You need injustice to make your audience stay. You need the world to be dangerous so the viewer doesn't leave. You've probably seen this pattern. A person's content changes subtly over time. At first, they share vulnerability. It's real. Then it becomes recurring. The pain becomes the schedule. And then the pain becomes seasonal, always timed to recapture attention. The hidden self learns that suffering is the easiest way to keep love coming from strangers. But that love is unstable. It disappears the moment your audience stops feeling entertained by your pain. So the person increases intensity, more tears, more anger, more labels, more dramatic wording, more declarations that nobody understands them. And then you get the worst version of this culture, not just victimhood, but victimhood as identity. In that stage, the person isn't merely hurt. They are committed to being hurt because it protects their self-worth. If they accept that they might need to change, their identity collapses. So they defend the injury. That's why some people can't heal even when healing becomes available. They don't want the relief, they want the role. Now let's address the most popular lie inside victim culture. It's the lie about lack of opportunity. People say the world is closing doors. They say the system is rigged. They say there are no chances. They say their parents blocked them. They say society doesn't care. Sometimes that's true for a fraction of people in a fraction of contexts. But the cultural story is too general, and it conveniently avoids the question, what would you do if nobody handed you anything? In today's world, the opportunities are more abundant than at any point in human history. You have global markets in your pocket. You have tools that reduce skill barriers. You have platforms where competence can be seen without needing a gatekeeper who personally likes you. A person with a phone can build an audience. A person with writing skill can sell services across borders. A person with design ability can take work from anywhere. A person can learn from free educational content at scale. You can prototype, you can test, you can iterate. And if you want to work with speed, modern tools can multiply productivity. It's not magic, it's acceleration. So if someone insists there are no opportunities, what they are often saying is something else. They're saying they have no tolerance for effort without reward. They want outcomes but not practice. They want progress without discomfort. They want success without the bruises. They want to be protected from failure. And this brings us to the hidden shame. Often, behind all the blame, there's a fear of being ordinary. There's a fear of trying and not being special. There's a fear that your best efforts won't be enough. And to avoid that shame, the mind invents a story where you were doomed by circumstances. It feels safer to be oppressed than to be average. It feels safer to be blocked than to be unskilled. It feels safer to be unlucky than to face that you might be the problem. So victim culture becomes a psychological insurance policy. But let's not pretend this only exists online. It exists in relationships too. A common pattern. Someone claims they were gaslit, triggered, or abused, but the actual problem is that they can't tolerate disagreement. They can't tolerate repair conversations. They can't tolerate taking feedback. They interpret every boundary as attack, and then they collect sympathy. They call their friends. They post anonymously. They seek therapy content that confirms their narrative. They build a chorus around their feelings. Meanwhile, their behavior doesn't change. Their communication stays chaotic. Their demands stay unrealistic. Their emotional regulation stays unstable. So the relationship repeats the same failure with new characters. Because the root issue isn't that life is cruel. The root issue is that the person refuses to practice discipline in the face of discomfort. Now, the fourth dimension of this tragedy is identity collapse, and it's deeper than any comment section drama. A lot of people today absorb cultural narratives without filtering them. They adopt ideas like you only live once, love yourself, be true to yourself, your feelings are sacred, and they turn them into excuses for selfishness. These concepts can be healthy when used correctly. Love yourself doesn't mean neglect others. Be true to yourself doesn't mean ignore reality. Live your life doesn't mean burn bridges before you earn stability. But when these ideas land in fragile minds without maturity, they become a justification engine. It becomes, I come first. My emotional comfort is the measure of truth. If you don't respond the way I need, you're harming me. If you challenge me, you're abusive. If I fail, the system is broken. That's not freedom. That's avoidance. It produces snowflake personalities, not because they're physically weak, but because their identity is not built on competence or responsibility. Their identity is built on emotional demand. And when emotional demand meets the real world, the collapse is inevitable. Real life doesn't care if you feel invalidated. Real life doesn't stop because you're triggered. Real life doesn't reward everyone equally. And when it doesn't, the fragile identity experiences it as persecution. So they retreat into the safest environment they can find, the digital comfort zone. The problem is, that zone doesn't build resilience. It rehearses grievance. And grievance rehearsals create a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you practice being a victim, the more you interpret everything as threat. The more you interpret everything as threat, the more you act defensively. The more you act defensively, the more conflicts you attract. Then your data confirms your identity. That's how it becomes a trap. Now let's talk about family, because family is where the hidden self either grows or collapses.
Traditional cultures, including many Asian cultures, often functioned as protective structures. Not perfect, but protective. Family ties gave people context. It gave them continuity. It gave them accountability.
When you failed, someone still knew you were you. When you were lost, someone could guide you back because they remembered your history. Family was an emotional shelter and a moral framework. Now, with a wave of extreme individualism, young people are encouraged to cut off as a proof of independence. They're told that parent concern is invasive. They're told that financial obligation is oppression. They're told that returning home is a sign of weakness. And yes, sometimes parents do harm. Some parents are controlling, some are neglectful, some create toxic environments. Real harm exists. Real boundaries are necessary. But this is the trap. When you reject everything about family, you also reject the possibility of repair. You also reject your emotional roots. You also reject the buffer that would have softened the impact of your failures. So you leave home early, not because you're ready, but because you want to prove something. You want to be seen as independent. You want to escape criticism. You want to chase a self-image that feels modern. Then the bills arrive, the loneliness arrives, the insecurity arrives, and you realize that freedom without stable support is not empowerment, it is exposure. This is why some countries see horrific outcomes as individualism strengthens: older people dying alone, young people isolating in apartments for months, the disappearance of basic human contact that used to function as a safety net. It's not because these societies are full of bad people, it's because the social fabric weakens. Nobody knows you deeply enough to notice when you disappear. You can call it privacy in polite language, but the result is the same. You become invisible, and